From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They called me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. When there's something strange in the space station, who you gotta blame? Space fungus. Paul, can I get a weird siren and then like an astronaut, whatever an emergency signal is on the
maybe
ISS?
A Ghostbusters theme sound-alike that we won't get sued for by Huey Lewis and the news.
Popo Sow!
Not Popo Zow. How dare you? How dare you invoke Popo Zow?
We defer to you, Paul, because you're the best in the business at this. That's right, folks. After years of speculating on space travel and mushroom aliens a la Lovecraft, we're finally diving into the topic of fungus in space. And forgive us for saying it, it's literally out of this world. Hashtag no pun left behind. Here are the facts. Fungus is amazing.
Dare we say fantastic. If you want to find out some more outside of this episode, we highly recommend the documentary Fantastic Fungi, which goes through a lot of the things that make these creatures, organisms, weird sentient beings very special. And confusing.
Yeah, and confusing. Speaking of confusing, let's have some fun with this one. We were talking a little bit off air. Is it fungi? Is it fungi? Is it fungi or fungi? I suggest respectfully that we use all of them interchangeably just to stick it to the mycologist in the crowd.
That's right. And while there aren't necessarily this many pronunciations of what these things are, there are 144,000 different species of them. And that includes, sort of cousins like yeasts, rusts. I'm sorry, Ben, smuts.
Smuts, yeah. Yep.
Like dirty mags? What are we talking here?
That's anthropomorphizing. That's the human term. Yeah. Fungi. There are a lot of fungal things. They include mildews, molds, rust, yeast, and of course, most famously, the Kobe Bryant of the gang, mushrooms. And the weird thing is, we know for sure that there are many, many more species in this kingdom that science has yet to discover.
Mm-hmm.
Some might not even be from Earth. Spoiler.
Some are definitely not from Earth.
We also know there are many fungus-like organisms. Biologically, they're kissing cousins. Things like slime molds, or which we'll talk about. They're quite intelligent. Or water molds. A fancy name for those is Oomycetes.
And I guess if I'm not, my safety. That sounds like a thing you'd say when you're excited.
My safety, you dirty boy.
Isn't something of these things have in common kind of the way they proliferate, like using spores and the like?
Yeah. They reproduce differently from the fauna of Earth in that they shoot out spores, and these spores evolved to function. At least the ones we know about, they evolved to function in Earth's gravity, which means it's kind of like you shoot an arrow into the air and you're not sure where it lands, but you know it will fly in something like an arc unless it picks up a wind pattern. And true story, some creatures or entities in this kingdom of fungus, they have evolved to propagate towards certain wind patterns, which is cartoonishly specific of them. But that's not even the beginning of how specific these little guys get. I mean, they're mysterious. And it's weird that they're still so mysterious, right? Because fungi, these fun guys, are some of the most widely distributed life forms on Earth. To your point, Noel, that sporing reproduction works very well.
Yeah. Well, and when those spores get shot out, sometimes if they land on like a surface like soil, like the ground, they proliferate best. Some, if they land in water, they like to live there and they grow the best. Some, grow on your walls, man, behind your walls. Ugh.
And those are the ones you got to be scared about. I mean, if you're any homeowners out there just heard, black mold in this voice screaming in the back of their minds, that requires serious mitigation. It can mess up your property value first off, but it can also literally kill your family slowly, over time by ingesting and inhaling these molds.
And yeah, like mesothelioma, or asbestos exposure consequences.
That's right.
It's something you might not notice for years or decades. Very dangerous.
Silent killer.
Exactly. And the important thing to note there is that moisture is often one of the major factors when it comes to the way these things grow and how well they grow, whether it's in soil or just, in a body of water or something like that.
That's why a good dehumidifier in a basement is worth its weight in gold.
I'm just laughing because to that point, Matt, I'm picturing whomever is this week the world's most evil billionaire talking to some species of fungus and saying, "You too require moisture. We're not so different, you and I." Still my favorite villain line, "We're not so different, you and I."
Oh, yeah. I do love that line. And it's just so true. Because in the end, right, everybody's got that greater good they're fighting for. Even fungus.
Yeah, fungus is the protagonist of its own story.
Dude, well, because some fungus is great and is actually beneficial for other plant and animal life. Other fungus, though, is just out for its own thing.
Shout out Last of Us. Shout out Cordyceps. Yeah.
Fruiting bodies, right?
Parasitic, right. We did an episode and a video back before we went to audio podcast. We talked a bit, I think, about the incredible subgenre of fungus. I'm not using the correct taxonomy, but there are not, like Last of Us, for anyone who doesn't know, does not come from a vacuum. There are parasitic life forms that alter the behavior of their prey, and they make them do crazy, crazy things. Now, it's not just it's not just restricted to fungus, but you have to know these things are much more animate than they may appear if you and your hippie friends are out foraging in the woods.
Well, yeah, even in the way they communicate with each other through practically neural networks. We'll get to that 100%. But, the question then becomes, maybe we lead with, what exactly is a mushroom? We know, I'm surprised there hasn't been more of a mushroom lobby to encourage the edible types, like the incredible edible egg. But the fact of the matter is, not all mushrooms are created equal. And some of them are delicious when sauteed with butter, and some of them will kill you, as we know from that story out of Australia that Matt brought to us about the woman that I believe made some sort of beef Wellington out of death cap mushrooms? Yeah.
Which probably came over to Australia on the pine trees. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird story. And this is not, by the way, the first person to allegedly commit homicide in this fashion. Tale as old as time. And I think that's a great question to start with. What are mushrooms? Most of us, if we're not mycologists, even if we're very good at identifying mushrooms in the wild, you might often think that what you are seeing is the entire organism. It's not. You're sort of just seeing it's dick and balls, because the mushroom that you see in the air right above the surface or on the surface of something is the fruit of a much larger organism living underground. They're the reproductive organs of a much larger creature.
You just said it so.
Let's just get it out of the way. I mean, the mushroom tip that you see does quite resemble.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Human, phallus. I mean,
I guess you're right.
It just does. So.
I guess you're right. The real life form is a network of microscopic filaments, things you can't see the entirety of it with the human eye. They're called hyphae, Hyphae.
Not to be confused with the hip hop craze of the early 2000s. Remember hyphae? Like Vans, got my Vans on, but they look like sneakers, the Wolfgang and early Lil B. That was the hyphae rap movement.
So these colonies, these mycelia, they spread out in 3 dimensions through the undersurface, if we want to sound D&D about it, the Underdark, if we want to sound Baldur's Gate. And they are essentially always at a buffet. They are not discriminatory. They will feed on basically everything: roots, wood, and yes, the bodies of the dead.
Yeah. And they form networks. So like as one, let's say one of these series, right? One of these colonies, imagine it 40 feet from where you are right now. And then there's another one where you are. And then as those things spread out, they connect together.
This is something that's really beautifully, I guess, dramatized, for lack of a better term, in Fantastic Fungi. They have these sort of CGI kind of recreations of what it would look like if you sort of animated the way signals kind of bounce around in these networks. And they're sort of like, I guess, animated using sort of beads of light kind of dancing around between these points. And like you said, Ben, it is a three-dimensional network that goes a lot farther than you might think. And we'll get into what that actually, means in a little bit, but really, really cool images in that film. Ooh, also, just last thing, if anybody is into just trippy imagery, there's nothing cooler than watching mushrooms grow in time lapse. It is so cool. And it really points to kind of how alien and mutant some of these things really seem like. And there's a ton of that in the Fantastic Fungi documentary.
I've never said no to a time lapse, and I'm not about to start saying that now. I'll also, one way to understand it, folks, if you have studied termite colonies, termite hives, then maybe the best way to put it is through comparison. Termite hives are like Duplo constructions, and these fungal networks are like the Lego or Technique for the nerds in the crowd.
Right.
Welcome. You came to the right place. Technic. Okay. All right. We're fun guys. So there's also a common misconception that I think a lot of people have, which is we think of mushrooms as plants. We think of fungus as a plant life form. It is not. They are actually more closely related to animals in that they breathe oxygen, they exhale carbon dioxide, and they cannot contain chlorophyll, or they don't for the most part.
They literally have gills.
Really?
Oh yeah, underneath the mushroom, the tip, the head. There's these things that are officially called gills,
but not for water, but they look exactly like fish.
I'm just saying,
gills,
almost there is a certain part of the nomenclature of mushrooms that feels more like describing human or animal biology, physiology, than it does like describing plant life.
Again, Lovecraftian. Yeah. So these weird mixtapes of superpowers, according to some more out there researchers like the late and controversial ethnobiologist Terence McKenna, and philosopher, I would argue, they'll even suggest that certain mushrooms are responsible for the evolution of human intelligence as we know it, getting human civilization across the gap of the bicameral mind, even leading to the creation or discovery, if you like, of religion. And it's no secret that mushrooms and other fungi are often associated with witchcraft, and anywhere you go in the world, these entities have existed in step with the primates that later became humans. As a result, there are tons and tons of folklore involving mushrooms, often in a sinister or epiphantic or like revelatory sort of way.
Yes. And if you're super interested in that concept of mushrooms potentially having an effect on the evolution of humans, right, and our intelligence, do check out our episode from 2019. It's called Psilocybin, Fact, Fiction, and Future with Robert Lamb. It's a great conversation.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. And check out Stuff to Blow Your Mind with our pals, Rob and Joe. And so Joe also, of course, famously, we say it several times a year, Joe led us down quite the rabbit hole with the bicameral mind episode. And so, like, okay, German folklore, witches dance inside fairy rings. Fairy rings are formed by mushrooms. French fables will warn anybody against stepping into these fairy rings, which are sometimes in France called sorcerer's rings. And they say if you do, you'll get cursed by a specific kind of toad, a toad that seems haunted, a toad that has bulging eyes.
Hey, did you put this in here for me, my former young German boy heritage?
I did. That's why we
you.
put the German folklore in there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What's this toad gonna do to you? Hop around near you and just look at you?
Bulge at you, man. Those eyes. They just give you the evil eye.
I ain't scared of no toad.
Oh, you don't know, dude. Not until they come at you. Hey, now, careful. Huey Lewis will be coming for you, buddy, before you know it. You know what else, though? It's something that you see a lot in kind of psychedelic fiction, like Alice in Wonderland. Alice eats the part of the different mushrooms, to become big and small, and all of that. And the hookah-smoking caterpillar, as described by Jefferson Airplane, is sitting on giant mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, in most obviously, right, we're all making the connection. The idea of a toad with bulging eyes, had it been infected by a certain type of fungus that was changing its behavior, there may be some sand to that. But in the bulk of Western folklore, at least, these things are seen as magical objects, or they're seen as perhaps a symbolic gateway to a greater realization.
Right.
They're not seen as entities with agency. And that's fascinating because one of the hottest debates in recent decades concerns the idea of, kid you not, conspiracy realists, fungal intelligence, which sounds super H.P. Lovecraft. It's about to get even more Lovecraft, by the way, but legitimate scientists are making this argument. We picked one that we've got to mention just because his name is amazing. Professor of biology at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. I know. His name is Nicholas P. Money.
Yeah. Pew, 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 pew. And really quickly, the Lovecraft reference, just I know most people are familiar, but I think one thing that invokes this for me is that a lot of the deities of Lovecraft stories are these kind of ancient earth spirits, or from the depths of the sea, or in some way from so deep, deep, deep down that they're basically in another realm. But I picture these things as having like mushrooms growing out of their bodies, and sort of being like one with the roots of the trees and part of this sort of like deeper, esoteric knowledge of the planet and the universe.
Oh, we'll get to that part.
Well, it's kind of weird because the stuff that Nick Money is talking about almost lends itself to maybe
DJ
feeling
Money.
like,
Boo, 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 boo. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
yeah, but it's feeling like maybe there's something to it.
Yeah. Professor Money, first off, also a great name. These are for free, Nick. Professor Money argues for fungal intelligence in terms of operational capacity, right, or capability, which is what we've talked about when we talk about how the human species still can't define intelligence. Fungus can operate as, like, different species of fungus can operate as an individual or as a group. It appears to make decisions based on things that would increase its likelihood of consuming resources and reproducing. It can learn. It has short-term memory. That doesn't mean it's conscious or sentient, but it does make a case that these things are having some sort of agency, creating or pursuing better environmental situations. Spooky, spooky stuff.
Well, think about short-term memory. Like, that means some information is stored somewhere within the network, within the single organism or the group of organisms. You cannot have short-term memory without information being stored and then accessed again. Mm-hmm. That's so intense to me.
Think of memory in a computer that sort of acts as short-term memory, and like hard drive space would be maybe the long-term memory, but the RAM or whatever it is, that you're using in whatever computer system you have, it is like the stuff that is needed for like the short term, for the time being, is loaded into that and then moved on.
And guys, I want to take a quick side note, folks. For the last few episodes, you may have heard a cat in the background. Unfortunately, I have a cat who is not doing very well, so I need to keep an eye on him. And Matt, Noel, I want to say I appreciate you guys for tolerating that. So we're going to go ahead and get through this episode, because I think what you bring up there, Noel, the idea of the computer analog is the idea of storage of a past situation is indeed fascinating. That is not what you think about when you're eating a fantastic mushroom pizza, right? That's not what you think about when you are, like me, making a kick-ass mushroom quesadilla.
Yeah.
We also know that things very much like fungus, the aforementioned slime molds, they can make incredible logistical decisions that rival those of human beings. Perhaps the most I would say, illustrative experiment involved slime mold that was able to generate the most effective and accurate map of the Tokyo rail system.
Yeah, you can find that in an article from Wired by Laura Sanders from their science desk. Slime mold grows network just like Tokyo rail system. It's got images of how long it takes it to form. And once again, like if you watch like time lapses of this kind of stuff, it is remarkable because you also might notice that if you have like your front yard or whatever, and you see a little mushroom, and then you have a big rain, you might come out like 2 hours later, and that thing's doubled in size. So these things grow at alarming rates with a serious complexity to them. And because we're not even seeing what's happening behind the scenes, right? Underground.
And again, credit to Laura Sanders from January of 2022 for that fantastic summation over on Wired on the slime mold network. It seems that overall, in exchange for not having the superpower of photosynthesis, fungi have gained other superpowers, the ability to control other creatures, to live with or through them, etc., etc. Why are we telling you all this? First, because we think it's super interesting. Second, because we want to explore a notion this evening that haunts us just as much as it haunted H.P. Lovecraft in his day. What if the first extraterrestrials humans meet aren't animals at all? What if they're some sort of mushroom? We're going to pause for a word from our sponsor. Let's all go check on our portobellos, and we'll be right back. Here's where it gets crazy.
Ben, I just had a flash of fungus technology, like an intelligent fungal species
Biotech,
that we
yeah.
encounter that creates its own technology. I know that's been portrayed in places, but I don't like what just happened inside my brain visual stuff.
Mm-hmm. And your brain is really your first spaceship. So hold on. I mean, maybe not a mushroom like you'd order a pizza, but how about a fungus?
Well, you mentioned mushroom technology, Matt, and in the realm of like cinema and fiction, I think a creator that does a great job of depicting this kind of stuff is David Cronenberg in movies like Naked Lunch or, Videodrome. There's a lot of kind of like body horror modification kind of stuff that involves these sort of outgrowths, that have very mushroom-like qualities. Pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
So let's stick with fiction here because we owe it to the Lovecraft fans, of which I count myself in their number. In the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft, as many of us listening tonight doubtlessly know, there is precedent for this. The alien race, the Migo, Mi-Go, are they're an interstellar capable species of things that kind of look like crustaceans, but are actually fungoid in nature. They're from a planet called Yuggoth, and they get into all sorts of what we can just call lovable hijinks, the way that Requiem for a Dream is a great date night film.
Yeah, these are infernal beings, aren't they, Ben?
They're ancient aliens is a good way to describe them. And as bizarre as that might sound, it might sound like Lovecraft was off his gourd, right, out of his badger bag on drugs or something. But turns out science is proving that these fungi are actually a pretty fantastic candidate for the first aliens that humans meet. They're up there with the water bear, the tardigrade, the legend in the game when it comes to outer space for survival. They're maybe better than the tardigrade, honestly. And like human astronauts, some form of them is already in space. It's already happening. Like that ship has sailed. That rocket has launched. Mushrooms or fungus are there other astronauts that are non-human that beat you to space if you're listening tonight.
Astro guy.
Far more adaptable than you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't we already have like space mold that's become a bit of an issue for astronauts on the International Space Station?
It's a huge problem. Imagine, I mean, owning a house, right? Your little spaceship on the space of Earth's surface is already pretty stressful. Now you can't drive to Home Depot, you can't DoorDash some Taco Bell or whatever. You're officially responsible for your own diarrhea in space. You can't do a lot of stuff. And there are so many things that could go wrong. Ever since people went to space for longer than just like a lost cosmonaut, Gagarin kind of jaunt there and back, ever since that moment that people spent time in space, mold and fungus has been a huge problem. Science magazine has talked about it with the journalist Richard A. Lovett. And even now in the International Space Station, one of the things they have to constantly battle is mold, specific types of mold that are as determined and tenacious as your favorite horror movie villain. They're like Jason. They're like Friday the 13th. They don't stop. They always come back.
And we'll find out why these things proliferate so much better in space than they do even on Earth in a moment.
Yeah. And we have to also say that these issues go back much further than they go back much further than the ISS. All as far back as 1988, Russians aboard the Mir space station. They were Russian because it was a Russian space station. They looked out one of their observation ports one orbit, and they said, "Hey, something's on the window." And they probably checked with ground control, and they were like, "Is there supposed to be something on the window?" And ground control's like, "Bro, yet."
Yeah, I mean, this, alien, literally, I mean, you say trudging towards, and I'm just picturing, the first Alien film, where this unstoppable force is you're locked up with this thing in space and no one can hear you scream. But it turns out, the stowaway in this situation that was slowly destroying these, for all intents and purposes, pretty impervious windows made of something called titanium quartz, was revealed to have been a type of fungi that had stowed away by clinging to the astronauts themselves.
Think about how horrifying that is. You're stuck in a spaceship. If anything breaches into the outside of that spaceship, you're gone. Everybody's gone. Nothing you can do about it. Bye-bye. And this fungus is just sitting there hanging out on your windows, eating them.
Mm-hmm. It's coming in. And
from the inside.
Yeah, and this happened multiple times on the Mir space station alone. There is an infamous story from 1997 on Mir because they were never able to fix this problem nor really get their heads around it. And it's something we're talking about off air. Let's go cinematic with it. Let's go to the astronaut David Wolf. No, we don't know if he's a relation to Dick Wolf, but one day this astronaut is aboard Mir, and he opens a service panel, a little maintenance panel. And inside, he finds not just the mechanisms he was looking for, but large condensate globs, bowling ball size, beach ball size, big boys.
That's right.
Think about that. That globs of water that on Mir in their, what do they don't call it non-gravity situation. It's a very low gravity situation. Balls of water that's got stuff in and inside the ball and on the surface of that ball.
Gooey, slimy, ice cold orbs of stagnant water that were just absolutely swarming, teeming with dozens of species of bacteria and fungi. And of course, they weren't just stagnant themselves just by being made of stagnant water, they were already beginning to colonize and expand and move out in this low gravity environment into the wiring, the electrical systems of the place. Talk about moisture on Earth is terrifying, you know, but you can usually mitigate it with, like, I'm sorry, I'm an evangelist for dehumidifiers, but in space where this stuff is just going everywhere, getting into stuff.
So it's occluded, right? Which means you can see kind of through the water, but you can see the things moving within, which is even creepier. And let's italicize colonizing, because that goes back to the idea of agency, right? Are they deciding to do a thing, you know, or are they just fungying? It doesn't matter philosophically for Wolf, though, because he's got to, like, figure out how to stay alive till he can get back to Earth.
Oh, yeah. I keep imagining the moment of beholding it for the first time, pulling away that panel and seeing what looks like probably a creature of some sort, right? I mean, it probably looks like a living, breathing creature that is, you know, moving in the way it's floating there.
I hope it has a funny voice. It'd be awesome if it was like,
love it.
The wiring is terrible.
Oh, jeez. This is terrifying.
So it adapted. It didn't just adapt to the inner environment of space, a space station, but it adapted to the outer environment. It survived. It thrived on windows, control panels, air conditioners, cable insulators. You know, if you have ever, you know, had to mitigate black mold in a house or a domicile here on Earth, you know that it doesn't just go away. It doesn't move on. You have to intervene.
But again, anything that could potentially form condensation within the environment of the space station, right? That's what we're talking about. Because it's that water. It's that, beautiful, precious, holy water that allows these things to generate.
Mm-hmm. We both love moisture. We're not so different, you and I.
Oh, there it is. And it just points out, too, that, like, in this situation, like, is the mold, is the fungi the villain or just the hero in its own story? And, like, we're kind of irrelevant in the exchange. You know what I mean? As far as it's concerned.
Non-fungal life forms are vectors. They are another part of an environment to the thing. And every living thing is the protagonist of its own story. At this point, we can't blame anybody for saying, dang, this is the perfect setup for my next sci-fi horror novel. Thanks, guys. But in the real world, or the real orbit around it, scientists are not scared. They're very excited about the implications of life that seems, weirdly enough, pretty great at this whole space thing. And Matt, let's get to that thing you foreshadowed so beautifully. They're thriving because they're able, unlike humans, they're able to reproduce in space, right?
Yeah, it turns out the low gravity situation really works out when the way you reproduce is to shoot spores out from your person or your fungi. Because in the low gravity, you get a 360 shot, basically, especially if you're floating, right? When you're beginning to reproduce. It's kind of nice. Kind of works great because you can shoot those spores clear across, right, to the other side. Maybe even fill an entire space or room with your spores.
Yeah, it's nuts too, because since they don't have gravity, it's like when you see fire in low Earth gravity or a lack of gravity, or when you see do you guys watch those videos of astronauts talking to kids or talking to news organizations, and they have different foods that are floating around? Like, that's what those spores are doing. And to your point, Matt, they have nothing to stop them from expanding. Also, I think people still don't understand how spaceborne fungal species are able to be dormant until the perfect time. Somehow they know when to activate and begin sporing. And I would imagine, again, we're not mycologists, but I would imagine that's somehow based on perception of water, or access to moisture, or sensing food. I don't know.
So, you know, I think we've sort of made this point a couple of times. This stuff is just incredibly adaptable. And as you mentioned, they are able to reproduce out there. They seem to have an evolutionary leg up on human beings from the jump. Wouldn't you guys say?
I mean, yeah, at least in this environment, yeah, it seems some of the stuff they evolved on Earth has benefited them. And they have powers that humans don't. And scientists also have concluded that they need to study fungal growth and behavior in microgravity, especially to your point about adaptation, Noel, that ability to repair DNA damage from radiation. Like, what if you could somehow adapt that to humans? I don't know how you would begin to do that, but what if you could make the Homo fungoid? Homo fungiensis?
With CRISPR, one can do anything.
It's David Cronenberg. He's got the imagination for it. Let's put him in charge. No, it's true. And it really does make you, when you zoom back out and think about like our place in the universe and, you know, our attempts to push outward deeper into the universe and how much better suited fungi are for that journey, it really makes you kind of question, like, did they come from there in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Deep water, my friend, deep water. And it's startling knowing all this, knowing that the world's top scientists were aware that fungus was awesome in space. Nobody launched any of this into space on purpose until 2016, which is kind of recent, right?
Well, yeah. As we know, time is accelerating, everybody. We know this. 2016 feels like it was a couple weeks ago. Nope. No. But why do they do that? Like, why would they wait until 2016 to really try and study this stuff? For my money, I would say it's probably because you don't want too much proliferation of fungus, right, on a spacecraft. So you got to make sure you can control it at least to some extent. And they were probably figuring out the technology like to control it.
Yeah, that makes sense because your first priority is going to be to save the shuttle or the station and save the human
mission.
Save the mission. There we go. It's bigger than all of us. And so, yeah, that's a great point, man, because naturally it means that research is going to focus on the best cleaning method, the best sanitation method, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, long story short, that stuff worked, but they were never able to get to 100% success with it. And then they began to look at the problem in a different way, from a different angle. And they said, we can perhaps learn from these tiny boys. And at first, scientists weren't super worried about how these things might cause potential health problems without mitigation. They said, look, this will only really cause health problems if people live under stressful conditions, if they have compromised immune systems. And then somebody, one of the boffins in a room somewhere years ago said, hey, though, space is stressful for humans also.
Well, yeah, especially it's stressful on our immune systems, right? And we didn't know that at first. That's something we learned after launching, enough human beings into space to realize, oh, something in the environment up there is causing the immune systems to be at least mildly compromised. And a lot of that has to do with the stress the body, any human body, undergoes when existing in space. Think about the flight itself to get out of there, riding on that rocket, right? And then
you got to go through mega training to even prepare yourself to deal with those kinds of conditions.
Yeah. And the psychological stress of floating in space. Like, what is that? All those sci-fi movies are about that. Almost every single one ends up addressing the psychological effect of being in space. That is a real thing that is occurring inside the minds and bodies of every astronaut and cosmonaut and whoever else goes up.
That's right. And this was a bit of a red flag to some scientists, including a pharmaceutical scientist by the name of Sarah de Sager, who co-authored a paper for a team of scientists in Belgium's Ghent University. In an exhaustive review of literature, they didn't find a whole heck of a lot, but what they did find was mostly related to the detection of these different fungal species. And speaking to Live Science, she said concerning the findings of their paper, paper, specific fungi that have been found on spacefaring vessels such as Aspergillus flavus and members of the genus Alternaria, which couldn't sound more spacey if you ask me, are known to produce carcinogenic and immunodepressing compounds. Like, to your point, Matt, these molecules often form when fungi get themselves stressed.
Exactly. Right? Isn't that crazy?
It's really, really neat.
Like a contained stressful situation shared by different species somehow like contributing to one another. And then that fungi can potentially, the big problem here is that the fungi can infect the humans because they are more like compromised, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Difficult environment, cough, cough, outer space, cough, cough. I mean, and they also can survive in the vacuum of space for long periods of time. Right now, the fungus shows no signs of stopping exploration. And that's part of that is because of their other superpower. They're highly resistant to, or some species of fungus are highly resistant to radiation. Let's go to Marta Cortisau, who is
I'm sorry,
awesome,
Cortisau?
Yeah.
Cordyceps? That's kind of great, yeah.
Awesome microbiologist, and love the way she writes and speaks with people. She is a microbiologist at the German Aerospace Center in Cologne, and she led a team that took a common black mold that is irregular at ISS, Aspergillus niger, and they just smacked it with X-rays and heavy ions. The way she describes it is we fired, quote, stupid amounts of radiation at these little guys. And I love that you're a scientist and you're saying stupid amounts of radiation, because that's a good way to communicate with folks.
We know what that means.
Mm-hmm. And what they found was astonishing. Also, we'll have a bit of a tech explanation, but her team found that these specific spores could survive radiation doses of 5 to 1,000 gray. And gray is, by the way, the for all of us old fogies in the crowd, gray is the new rad. It's a measurement of radiation exposure. And humans, in comparison, if you were exposed to 0.5 gray, you start to get radiation sickness. If you get up to 5 gray, you're dead.
Ben, in my mind, when you said gray is the new rad, I was picturing it as replacing like the word rad as a slang. So I'm just going to start saying, bro, that was totally gray. I think that might pick up. What do you think, guys? Should we make it happen? Should we make gray happen?
I think we should. I'm going to start saying Cortisau.
I love it. What did Cortisau, though, have to say about this radiation testing?
Well, let's get into that. But just to quickly say this and connect it back to another episode or another topic, that UV radiation we're talking about isn't the exact same but it's very similar to the radiation from those lights we've talked about over and over and over again. The ones that kill the bacteria and E. coli and all the stuff in the water that are used in water treatment plants. Same kind of radiation, not quite the same thing. But in this instance, it's the stuff that you would use for disinfectant in a medical situation like a hospital.
And so Cortisau finds that these spores survive huge amounts of high energy UV radiation. To your point, Matt, about like the energy emitted by some of those high powered lights. And the weird thing about this is this research led them to disprove some of the established protocols for cleaning spaceships. The radiation that is used to sterilize the surfaces of spacecraft, it's the same stuff this fungus is immune to. So, whoops. It's like if you're trying to get rid of fruit flies and you say the best way to do this is to smear rotten fruit on the walls.
Ugh. Gross. So, what's the takeaway here, y'all? I think we can already say one of them is that fungi, mushrooms are freaking amazing. They're so versatile. They're so adaptable. And I think another is, like we said maybe a minute ago, Ben, we were kind of going back and forth, is that it's possible or actually probable then from the evidence, I would say the case that fungi are actually better equipped to survive and explore space than almost any other form of life on planet Earth.
That's true. I mean, they still, like we said, they need oxygen, right? And a few other gases for them to breathe or live like that. And they need moisture. And if you could make an environment with that stuff and then just launch it out, guys, maybe we can be the panspermia we've always been looking for.
Mm-hmm. It was the friends we made along the way, right? That's crazy because it also tells us about the origin of life. I love that you bring up panspermia, Matt. Let's go to an astrobiologist at New Mexico State University, Paul Mason. He says, look, the thing we don't always talk about is that no one knows how life went from prebiotic ingredients all the way to pretty complex microorganisms so early in history. In fact, some scientists believe this evolution required more time than had passed since the planet first became habitable. So he points to panspermia. He says maybe life originated elsewhere in our solar system, maybe somewhere even farther away, And he says now we know life from Earth can survive in space. So maybe it could have arrived on Earth from somewhere else. This is not stoned college kids talking in a dorm room. These are experts in their fields, and they're talking about exactly what I think more people should be exploring. Fungus as astronaut. Was it the first astronaut ever in, like Earth terms? Can we make deep space explorations with fungus as our crew? I don't know.
Well, I mean, imagine what that would look like. I think it would. Look, I'm no scientist. I'm no expert. I'm not even a stoned college student. I feel like if there was some kind of carrier for a fungus, right, that was traversing within a galaxy somehow or in a solar system, they got launched from some explosion of other heavenly bodies. And on that, whatever that projectile was, that meteor, that asteroid, if it had enough ice on it that was being burned off essentially as it's being warmed up, you could have an environment that had potentially the necessities for this, fungal growth, right? And it could just hitch a ride. And if it somehow miraculously survived the burn, right, of entering, well, maybe there's no atmosphere, right, to burn it up upon entering, or at least close enough to a planet to land. I could totally see that.
We're speaking of Lovecraft a lot here too. It just reminded me of more so, I think, the film adaptation, but The Color Out of Space with Nicolas Cage. I think it involves a meteorite that crashes into the Earth and then cracks open, and inside of it is this black slime mold stuff that kind of creeps around and infests things and turns them into monstrosities or sort of these hybridized kind of, abominations.
Mm-hmm. And with that, now that we're getting to the deep water or the deep ink, I propose we pause for a word from our sponsors. Of course, the famous Migo of Yugoth, not to be confused with the Migos of Atlanta, or maybe they're the same. And we'll be right back to dive further into this. We have returned. So can we purposely grow, for lack of a better phrase, non-human astronauts? The short answer, believe it or not, is yes. It'd be expensive to build a craft and launch it out in the correct trajectory, but you could theoretically pick your favorite fungal life forms, pack them up into something, and shoot them to Mars or shoot them to the moon. It'd be even easier. And then just, let a few million years pass. Roll the dice, right?
To the moon, fungi.
Hey,
there we go.
Bang zoom.
It's the new stonk. It's the new GameStop. Fungal astronauts. I mean, it's not on the list of priorities, though, right? Because right now, human science, is concerned with what can be learned from these superpowers. I was surprised to find that one of the big areas of study is what fungi can teach us about medications. Could you somehow adapt this survivability to ensure the safety of, for instance, a pharmacy on Mars, right? Because you can't ship the various substances there easily. They're going to be exposed to radiation and all kinds of other variables.
Well, hell, man, isn't penicillin a fungus?
And yeast. Don't forget baker's yeast.
Yeah, Penicillium fungi, first mass-produced antibiotic.
I mean, pretty crazy stuff, right? And what I think is crazier is that the future or the ancient past seems to be rushing toward the present. There's a guy named Andre Antunes, who's a researcher at the Macau University of Science and Technology in China, who says the same stuff. Especially shouts out yeast and fermentation and says, down on Earth, fungi are employed to make food. We use yeast for fermentation, as well as medicines, chemical enzymes for industry, and metal nanoparticles in different fields and applications. We're never going to be able to get rid of the fungi as we venture into space, so we need to understand them. That verges on philosophy in a way, or therapy. I don't know. I don't know if Fungus has a therapist. I also don't know where that joke's going.
No, but I think we're all just like deep in thought here because this is some heady stuff. No question about it.
Yeah, I had no idea that I guess yeast and other funguses were being launched into space like as early as 2009 to study things like how dangerous can bacteria and other forms like that be if you just let them hang out in space. And, if they aren't experiencing the other factors that environments on Earth would like kind of mitigate some of the not virality, but the dangers of like a bacteria or a yeast, like a yeast infection or something like that. So they launched a satellite where they let this stuff kind of just proliferate inside this little microsatellite. And then they were going to use that for their research to see if you can actually create drugs or some kind of medication that would stop that growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's smart. It's necessary if humanity's future is indeed the stars. And it's so strange, it's a good lesson about anthropocentrism because the same factors that limit human reproduction outside of Earth are the same factors that help fungal reproduction. Like the lack of gravity is a huge disadvantage to developing embryos or fetuses in Earth life, or human life, I should say, but it's awesome for these tiny guys. And we don't know how far they could go, right? Like, here's a cool thing from Adriana Blachowicz. She investigated fungi on the ISS, the International Space Station, and she said this: I think the biggest message is that fungi and bacteria are an integral part of human bodies. Wherever we go, fungi and bacteria will follow. So we can't get rid of them, right? Like, they're also more successful in space. I think the human scientists are smart when they say, let's team up. And then, of course, maybe this is, I don't know about you guys, this is the thing that keeps catching me. What if aliens do contact human life on Earth or on the moon or on the solar system somewhere, and it turns out that they are fungal life forms? What if their version of Take Me to Your Leader is their network sending out electrical signals that doesn't clock for the humans or the human astronauts, but all of a sudden the fungus and the mold starts reacting in a new way to that message?
I can imagine it. It feels to me like those organisms function on such a different time scale than humans and other, larger life on Earth functions. I just wonder how the interaction would actually go, right? What's the speed of the communication? What's the technology? Because you can't get just fungus in space, like just hanging out or traveling far distances. It would have to use some kind of technology.
Fungus technology, mushroom tech. There we go back to that again. But also, what is their intention? And is there even an intention? Is it just purely physiologically driven and a need to just procreate and spread? Like, I think that's what we see in these complex systems of bacterium and fungi is that, but then we posit in this episode too, is there a certain sentience to these things too that maybe we don't fully understand? Is there a language? We've hit on the ability to have short-term memory and to be able to quote unquote make decisions, but does it like go beyond that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the same question, right? The same series of questions. How would that contact work? What if the extraterrestrials, quote unquote, that humans meet are some sort of interstellar slime mold and they're just expanding through vectors? What if Earth is just a little stop point or a way station on the path to what they're actually looking for, which is like Spore Prime or whatever that version of religion would be, if we could even ascribe religion to non-human entities. It's fascinating stuff, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, folks. Was H.P. Lovecraft onto something? Do you have the answers to some of the questions we're asking here? Will fungal astronauts be okay with us, we poor earthlings who still enjoy eating mushrooms? Will they be fine with it? Or will it be like a bad look for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some sort of affront. Like, who's eating who here? Because, hey, after all, we know mushrooms eat us too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The circle of life. And we hope that you participate in the circle of life on this show, folks. Let us know the answers. We can't wait to hear from you. You may end up on the air with us. We try to be easy to find online.
Conspiracy Stuff on X, YouTube, and Facebook. Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram and TikTok. But wait, there's more.
We have a phone number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you choose to call, you'll have 3 minutes to give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your message and voice on the air. If you don't want to do that, why not? Instead, send us an email.
And let us know if you are of fungal intelligence. Regardless, we read every email we get where we are, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.